Welcome to this debate sponsored by the Department of Philosophy on the question, is abortion wrong? If you haven't done so already, if you have a phone, please do silence it. We wouldn't, because we are recording the event tonight. Eventually, you'll be able to watch it on YouTube and enjoy it all over again. So please do silence those phones. My name is Neil Klein in the Department of Philosophy. Thank you all for coming to the event tonight. I will give some very, very brief introduction. The no sign is going first?
Yes.
Okay. So,
Or the yes side. The for abortion will go first.
Okay. So, the gentleman seated over there, Steve Kershnar, distinguished teaching professor here at Fredonia. His research focuses on ethics and applied ethics, so he's done work in several other areas of philosophy. He's got at least 8 books, over 50, 60, 70 articles published, including articles on abortion, and a book on abortion and the pro-life worldview, which will be published later on this year by Routledge. His opponent, graciously handing out handouts, Dr. John Keller back there from Niagara University. Thank you for joining us, John. John's research focuses on metaphysics and philosophy of language, but he also has interest in moral philosophy, epistemology, philosophy of religion, and other areas. He's published a number of papers in several different journals of philosophy, and he has edited a book published earlier this year by Oxford University Press. So Steve Kershnar from here at Fredonia is going to be up first.
All right, before I begin, I really want to thank John Keller for showing up. John Keller is an excellent philosopher, incredibly bright. I've learned a lot from him in the past. I continue to learn a lot from him, and I will continue to learn from him in the future. So it's just absolutely a superb philosopher. It's a real pleasure to just be on the stage with someone of his caliber. Okay, so with that in mind, I am arguing that abortion is morally permissible. Okay, so just a brief overview of my argument. I'm going to begin with the claims for the motivation, why we should care about this issue, why it matters. Second, I'm going to give you my thesis. Third, I'm going to provide you with the concepts that we're going to use in this debate. Fourth, I'll give you my argument. And then fifth, we'll look at some objections. All right, so what's the motivation for this concern? Okay, abortion is incredibly frequent. In 2014, for example, the latest available data, 19%, so roughly 1 in 5 pregnancies end up with abortion. Right? There are roughly 1 million abortions a year in the U.S., and roughly 1.5%, so rounding off 2% of women who are of fertile age had abortions in any one given year, for example, in 2014. So if we were to criminalize it, and Dr. Keller's not going to address whether it should be criminal or not, although he is going to address whether it should be whether it's moral or immoral. If we criminalize it, we're talking a sea change in the lives of American women. Second, unintended pregnancies are incredibly common. Roughly half of all pregnancies among U.S. women were unintended. And of the unintended pregnancies, the 50% of pregnancies that were unintended, roughly 4 out of 10 of those were aborted. All right, gestational age. Over 90% of abortions occur roughly in the first 3 months. Now this matters because brain waves in the cerebral cortex only begin at about 5.5 to 6 months. So most abortions occur before fetuses have cerebral brain waves, or even the capacity to have cerebral brain waves. Okay, electrical activity. At the end of week 5, there is some electrical activity, but it's not yet in the cerebrum. Okay, so it's just a little bit of background in terms of frequency, unintended pregnancy, and gestational age. Okay, what's my thesis? My thesis is that abortion is morally permissible. There is nothing morally wrong with having an abortion. What are the relevant concepts? First of all, a right is a claim. So to have a right against someone is just to be owed a duty. When it comes to justice, justice is satisfied when one person satisfies the rights of another. Right? So justice is satisfied when one person satisfies the rights of another. I use an example from a philosopher, a very famous MIT philosopher called Judith Jarvis Thomson. And Thomson argues that, look, you can act immorally, selfishly, rudely, but still act justly. And she used the example of this older brother, right? Kind of older brother defamation, which is a side note I resent. And he has this really big box of chocolates he's been given. It's been given to him. So he sits there eating it slowly, enjoying each chocolate, while his younger brother, that little punk, sits there, enviously wanting to be given the chocolate. Now, you might say the older brother is selfish. You might say he's mean. You might say he's vicious. But he's not unjust because he's not infringing the rights of the younger brother. So when we're worried about justice, we're worried about rights. Okay, what about the right to life? That's going to be the central right here. The right to life is the right not to be unjustly killed. The right to life is the right not to be unjustly killed. You are unjustly killed if someone infringes on your right and her doing so results in your death. So you have a right to life is dependent upon other rights. Okay, so kind of a nice example to illustrate this. Judith Thompson again brings up the point of Henry Fonda, kind of a heartthrob in past decades, and she's dying, and the only thing that will save her life is the cool hand of Henry Fonda on her fevered brow. So they call up Henry Fonda and say, Henry, will you fly over from California to Massachusetts and touch Judy's fevered forehead to save her life? And he says, hell no. You know how good the parties here are in Hollywood? There's no way I'm going over there, right? I got better things to do. Okay, again, he may be selfish, he may be vicious, he may be criticizable on all sorts of grounds, but he does not violate her right to life because she has no right that he fly over there and touch her fevered brow with his hand. So, right to life, right not to be unjustly killed. Okay, fetus in this case, I'm going to use it differently from how the biologists use it. By a fetus, I mean that thing that occurs from conception to birth. Right? So if you think, well, fetuses should include zygotes and embryos, that might be correct, but I'm just going to use fetus more broadly here. Okay, so what's my argument for abortion being morally permissible? Okay, so here's the central argument, and if you're following on the handout, you'll see it as the third box down. Right? So if you look on the left, the P1 stands for premise, P2 premise, C for conclusion. The first premise is, if abortion is unjust, then it infringes on the fetus's right to life, right? If there is a right that's infringed on, it's probably the right to life. Second, abortion does not infringe on the fetus's right to life. And if those two are true, then abortion is just. Now, the key part then is premise P2. Why would someone think that abortion does not infringe on the fetus's right to life? Well, three assumptions underlie that second premise. Right, so I'm looking at the column across from P2. Right? First, the fetus has no right to be inside the woman, at least if she doesn't want the fetus there. Second, if the fetus has no right to be inside the woman, then it may be removed with proportionate force. And third, abortion uses proportionate force. Okay, so my strategy is to defend each one of those assumptions, and if I can show you that each one of those assumptions is true, then I can show you that premise 2 is true, and if premise 2 is true, then the argument holds together. All right, no right to life. You might think, okay, well, how is the fetus going to have a right to be inside the woman? Well, it can't be the mere fact that the man and woman had intercourse, because mere intercourse is not consent. In the case of rape, the woman certainly has not given consent, and yet rape involves vaginal intercourse. What about voluntary intercourse? What happens if they voluntarily have intercourse? Is that sufficient to give consent? Here the answer is no. Let's split it up into two cases. In the first case, let's use an analogy with a burglar and then apply it to the case of intercourse. So imagine Thompson argues, the room is stuffy and Alice opens a window to air it out. Right? You can see the analogy to sex here. She had burglar bars installed outside of her windows precisely to prevent burglars from getting in, and a burglar got in only because of the defect in the bars. Well, you wouldn't say, look, you've consented to having the burglar in your house, sitting on your couch with his dirty feet and eating your Cool Ranch Doritos just because you've opened your window. I mean, you've done everything you can to keep Matt with the burglar bars. And in any case, it simply was not an invitation to come into the house or apartment. Even if Alice did not have bars, so you see the second case with the burglar entering, and she opens up her window and the burglar comes in, still she has not invited the burglar into her house. I mean, I used to live in Philadelphia. Philadelphia in the summer gets really hot and sticky. If I open the window and some homeless person comes in and sits on my couch watching my TV and eating my Doritos and other snacks, he has no right to be there, even if I've opened the window and thereby created the opportunity for him to come in. So, going back, assumption number 2, voluntary intercourse is not consent or permission for the fetus to come in. Even if the man and woman purposely got pregnant and then the woman wishes no longer to be pregnant. Perhaps the fetus is defective, or perhaps she changes her mind about whether or not she have a child. Well, you can withdraw consent. In fact, we do it all the time. So we have the party pooper case, right? So Betty has a party and she invites everyone to her house and she's having a really good time, right? Doing Jello shots, kamikazes. And then she discovers that the love of her life, her boyfriend, is making out with her best friend. And she says, you know what? That's really upsetting. Everyone get the hell out of my house. She's allowed to do that. You can disinvite people from your house. And similarly to how you disinvite people from your house, you can disinvite people from your womb. So, going back, mere intercourse is not sufficient for consent for the fetus to be in the woman's body. Voluntary intercourse is not sufficient for the fetus to have consent to be in the woman's body. And even if the couple purposely gets pregnant, and so the woman does give consent for the fetus to be in her body, she can withdraw that consent just like the party pooper withdrew consent for people to be in her apartment. Okay, now, removal, if you have someone who's trespassing on your property or otherwise trying to act unjustly, trying to steal your stuff, trying to beat you up, you can use proportionate force to prevent them from acting unjustly. Right? So someone's in my house, I can sort of perhaps gently guide the homeless person out of my apartment, to evict him and say, stop, sitting on my couch and eating my Doritos and just making a general mess out of things. So then the issue arises, is abortion a case of too much force? Assuming the fetus has no right to be inside the woman, and the woman's entitled to use proportionate force to drive out a trespasser, is abortion too much force? Okay. My argument is, in abortion, the woman uses proportionate force. First off, I claim that it is in fact permissible to use lethal force to defend against rape. All right, examples. They're ugly examples, but it's a kind of an ugly topic. There's no getting around the fact we need hard cases. So in prison, a large man named Big Amp goes to rape a small one named Sheldon. Sheldon seemed to be a good name of a wimp, right? The only way Sheldon can defend himself is to stab Big Amp with a shank. A shank is like a homemade prison knife. Given the absence of guards and the nature of the shank, it will likely kill Big Amp. Imagine he's a hemophiliac, for example. I claim that it is morally permissible, in fact, it's just, for Sheldon to stab Big Amp if that's the only way to prevent a prison rape from occurring. Even in cases where you give permission for someone to have sex and then you withdraw it, if they cease to have sex, that is, in fact, another type of rape, and again, you can use lethal force. Right? So, in the case here, couples decide to have intercourse. The woman becomes scared and sex becomes extremely painful for her. She tells the man to stop. The man refuses, increases his forcefulness, and continues onward for an hour. After an hour, the woman stabs him with scissors to make him stop. Again, as a matter of justice, the woman may use lethal force to prevent this rape. Okay, the next step's the key step, right? I claim that if you can use proportionate force to prevent rape, and if an unwanted fetus is as great an injustice as is a rape, then you may use lethal force to prevent an unwanted fetus. Here's the argument. Imagine in Auschwitz, the Nazis note an attractive 20-year-old Jewish woman. They tell her that she can have sex with the Nazi officers. That's option one. Option 2, she can carry the fetus of a Nazi officer and his wife. That's an unwanted pregnancy. Or number 3, she could be killed. Right? She chooses the sex. My claim for at least some women, that is a reasonable choice, showing that they, in fact, prefer the unwanted sex, the unwanted pregnancy. That's at least some reason to believe that the unwanted pregnancy is as great an injustice as is the unwanted sex. So given that involves the infringement of the right to own your body or to control it, and that it's a severe infringement, that warrants lethal force. If the unwanted pregnancy, whether in general or in this case, involves the same right, body ownership or control, and the degree of infringement is as severe, if not more severe, as evidenced in part by the preference, then it seems that you may also use lethal force to drive out the unwanted fetus. Okay, so going back to the argument then, I claim that premise 1, if abortion is unjust, then it infringes on the fetus's right to life. 2, abortion does not infringe on the fetus's right to life because 1, the fetus has no right to be there. If the fetus has no right to be there, it may be driven out with proportionate force. And 3, abortion uses proportionate force. Hence, abortion is just. Okay, let me go to the objections. All right, the first objection is the fetus has a right to be inside the woman because it has no other place to go. This is just not true, right? The only way you get permission to be inside another person is if you have their consent or if they forfeit their rights. The only way to be the right to be inside another person is if they give consent or you forfeit your rights. But the woman has done neither. She has not consented merely by having intercourse to the fetus entering her body, nor has she done something wrong that results in a right forfeiture. In short, the fetus is a trespasser on her body in the same way that a burglar is a trespasser in a house. The second objection is to concede, okay, all right, Kershnar, maybe you've shown the fetus does not have a right to be inside the woman's body, but still, it's just too much force. You can't use lethal force on a trespasser, and nor can you use it on a trespassing fetus. So the objection is, preventing trespass does not warrant lethal force, right? So some of the incredible intellectuals that are pro-lifers I know use this line. They say, all right, look, I'm not going to disagree with you. The fetus has no right to be inside the woman, but I am going to tell you it's just too much force. And they use examples like, Betty may have a claim to have her guests leave. Betty, remember, is the one who found her boyfriend making out with a best friend. But she may not force them to leave by slicing them up in a giant suction device that cuts them apart, similar to suction curettage in abortion. Nor may she have a giant group of forceps and rip them apart if they're refusing to leave her apartment. Too much force. Similarly, the owner of a private Gulfstream jet may not eject a particularly rude passenger, let alone subject him to one of these devices. Well, the problem here is that in the case of the party pooper and the jet, it's not anywhere near as severe a right infringement as it is in the case of the woman's body. It's just not as severe an infringement. And the amount of force that's proportionate depends on the degree to which the woman's right is being infringed on. If it's a really important right and it's being grievously infringed on, then you can use a lot of force. If it's a small right, someone's trying to steal your candy bar, you can only use a little bit of force to prevent them from stealing it. The third objection is, look, we've left an obvious distinction here, right? The fetus is innocent, right? The fetus is as innocent as you get. It's not morally blameworthy. It's morally pure. While a rapist is a scum of the earth. The opposite of innocence. So there's a lot of things that you could do to a rapist that you may not do to a fetus. And I think this is why most people think there's something wrong with this analogy. The problem is that you can use quite a lot of force even against innocent attackers because of what they're threatening to do. So even if someone's innocent, if they're a substantial and unjust threat toward you, you can use quite a lot of force to prevent them from invading your rights. So imagine you had a psychotic aggressor, right? You're in an elevator, and this person who's not blameworthy, in fact, he's mentally ill, attacks you with a knife, right? And he's innocent, he's not blameworthy in the sense that if a court were to try him, he would find him not guilty due to insanity. Still, you are permitted to pull out your .38 and shoot him dead with hollow point bullets if that's the only way to defend yourself. Even if the person doesn't even act, even if they're innocent, but they're not even an actor. Imagine you're at the bottom of a well and someone throws down an innocent midget towards you, but at such a speed he's going to crush you at the bottom of the well. You can shoot a ray gun to kill him from crushing you, even if the falling midget is innocent. Okay, so in short, I've argued three things. One, the fetus has no right to be inside the woman. Two, if the fetus has no right to be inside the woman, then it may be driven out proportionate force. And three, abortion uses proportionate force. As a result, the fetus's right to life is never infringed. And as a result, abortion is just. That's it. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much for coming. I'm pretty excited to be here. As you can say, I'm really grateful to Professor Kershnar and the entire SUNY philosophy department for having me. I debated Dr. Kershnar once before, and as I said then, it's kind of a intimidating experience. He just wrote a book on abortion. I'm just like a dude who sometimes thinks about abortion. But, you know, luckily I'm right. However, I want to start out by apologizing for, being a man. They asked me to do this debate, and, I kind of waited for someone else to take the job. No one did. And so I said yes, and there wasn't a lot I could do, or at least was willing to do, about being a man defending arguing against abortion. For what it's worth, my wife, and I think his wife, agrees with everything I'm about to say, so I don't know. It's probably not worth anything, but it makes me feel good to say it. All right, so I just want to start out with some kind of background distinctions. So when I talk about human beings, I'm talking about a member of the species, of our species, right? A living organism that belongs to our species. And as a matter of sort of scientific fact, fetuses are human beings, right? They're not just sort of parts of the mother in any sort of good sense. They're alive, right? They're living things. They're human. They have human DNA. They're distinct from their mothers. They're obviously genetically distinct from their mothers. They're a distinct organism. Sometimes people talk about fetuses as being a parasite. And they're organisms, right? They're not just sort of, like a skin cell or something like that. Now, when exactly a human organism comes into existence is maybe a bit controversial. Lots of embryology texts will say a new human organism comes into existence at conception. Some will say at implantation. That's less than 2 weeks after conception, so it's really not going to sort of give us much wiggle room. So basically, from the point in which almost anyone knows they're pregnant, the fetus is a distinct human organism, right? A human being. Now, a person is someone with a full set of rights. Here we're basically just interested in the right to life, right? So we don't need to debate too much about other rights. And so the abortion debate really isn't about whether fetuses are human. That's basically a scientific question, and the answer is that they are. It's about whether all humans have a right to life, and about whether abortion is wrong if the fetuses have a right to life. Okay. So I just said, the abortion debate was all about the status of the fetus and the fetus's rights. It's not about women's rights in any sort of particularly interesting sense. Professor Kershnar and I, and both sides of the debate in general, agree about the rights of women. I mean, women have the exact same rights as everyone does, right? The question is of whether the fetus has rights. Now, you might say, the debate is really about whether women have a right to do what they want with their own bodies. But but that's not true. I mean, nobody actually thinks that that's the case, right? Nobody thinks women have the right to kill people with their bodies, or assault people with their bodies, or rape people with their bodies. What's true, what everybody agrees about, is that women have a right to do what they choose with their own bodies as long as it doesn't violate the rights of other people, right? And so that's the question, right? Does the fetus have rights that are violated in an abortion? All right, so my assignment here is to argue that abortion's wrong, and I think it is basically for the reasons that are pretty standard. You know, if you take a philosophy class on abortion, this is kind of the argument that structures the entire debate. So premise one of the argument says that fetal human beings have the same right to life as you or I. Premise two says that if fetal human beings have the same right to life as you or I, abortion, except maybe in cases where the mother's life is in danger, is wrong. Therefore, abortion's wrong, right? So the argument is logically valid. I mean, really, the only question is whether these two premises are true. So I'm going to argue that they are. All right, so why think the fetus has the same right to life as you or I? I mean, that I think at least intuitively is kind of the main question in the abortion debate. And to be honest, I mean, just telling you autobiographically why I believe that, I believe it for a pretty straightforward reason. I believe it because I think there's such a thing as human rights, rights that every single human being has, and a fetus is a human being, right? So, you know, if you're reading ethics in some other context, almost always authors will say that the rights a thing has depend on its nature, right? It depends on the kind of thing it is, right? Not on sort of superficial properties like hair color or skin color or, you know, the ability to ride a bike. I mean, that's just sort of ridiculous, right? We all think that that's sort of obviously false, right? So, you know, fetuses, they're members of the human species. They have the same human nature as you or I. I think our rights depend on what kind of thing we are. What kind of thing are we? We're humans, right? And so are fetuses, so fetuses have the same rights. Now, in response, you might say, no, what matters, you know, when we say what kind of thing are you, it doesn't matter that you're human. What matters is that you're rational. It's being rational that gives you the rights you have, right? Or maybe you have a desire to go on living and a fetus doesn't have that, or whatever, some other thing like that. But look, I mean, newborn babies aren't rational either in any interesting sense. They don't have a desire to go on living. They don't have the concept of living. You know, I had a college roommate named Vinny, and he was a drinker, right? You know, and like once a week or so, he'd, you know, drink too much and be passed out on the floor, and it'd be a big pain once he passed out right in front of the bathroom. We couldn't get in there, you know, but like, we couldn't just like kill him. I mean, we could have had the dorm to ourselves, one less person in there. Vinny wasn't thinking rationally. Vinny wasn't desiring anything. He was completely unconscious, blotto. There was zero going on up there. But it still obviously would have been wrong to kill him. Now, this isn't, you know, you guys all agree with that, I'm sure. So then maybe you want to say, no, what matters is like the potential for rationality or the capacity to be rational. But then a fetus has that. I mean, just like a young baby, right? I mean, the baby isn't rational yet. It can't use language yet, but, you know, it has the potential. Well, so does a fetus. In both cases, you just need to wait. All right, so I think the right to life is a human right. I think all humans have it. You know, like they say in the Declaration of Independence. But, you know, what can I say to convince you if you don't agree? Well, look, consider this. You know, maybe if fetuses don't have rights, right, there would be nothing wrong with taking a drug that blinds the fetus, like prevents the development of vision in the fetus, but that obviously is wrong, right? It's wrong to take a drug that blinds one fetus, so fetuses have rights. I mean, they're morally important. You know, the right not to be blinded isn't quite the right to life, but presumably if fetuses have rights at all, they have the right to life. Now, maybe you think this is just sort of bizarre. Why would you do that? But, you know, almost all of us think that it's wrong to be getting, you know, super drunk while you're pregnant. Why? Well, the obvious answer is that it harms the fetus. Now, you might say that, yeah, it's wrong to take this blinding drug, but not because the fetus has rights. It's wrong to take the blinding drug because 10 years down the road, there's like a 10-year-old kid who can't, play sports or anything. Well, you can play sports when you're blind. But anyhow, there's a 10-year-old kid that's blind, right? A 10-year-old kid that's been harmed by your taking this drug. And likewise with excessive drinking. Maybe the problem with this isn't that it harms the fetus, but just that it leads to a person, a rational being who's been harmed. Well, there are two reasons why this objection doesn't work. First, in general, there's nothing wrong with doing things that make people worse off as long as we don't violate their rights, right? Anytime an employer has to pick between hiring two people, they pick one, they make the one they don't hire worse off. There's nothing wrong with that unless there's a rights violation involved, right? If the employer makes the decision on the basis of race, well, then there's a rights violation, and then it's wrong. But merely making someone worse off isn't wrong. But second, and more importantly, you can just change the example so no rational being is ever harmed whatsoever, right? Instead of a blindness drug, you take a drug that prevents the development of a brain, right? So you never end up with a rational being at all. You just end up with a kid with no brain, nothing going on up there at all, but it still would be obviously wrong to do that. All right, so that's why I think fetuses have rights, including the right to life. Now, Dr. Kershnar's argument, for the most part, just granted that fetuses had the right to life and was focused on arguing that abortion was okay, even if they do. And so I want to argue against that. So where he and I agree is that having the right to life doesn't mean that having the right to be saved or having the right to be taken care of by some other person, right? So in general, I don't think we do have an obligation to save other people, right? There's a whole bunch of starving kids in Bangladesh, and none of us give a crap, and they die, right? And maybe that's sort of pathetic, but I don't think it's wrong, right? I think we do have an obligation to save people in some cases, right? If your roommate, like my roommate in college, gets super drunk, throws up in the middle of the night, he's sitting there choking in his own puke, if I just watch him choke in his own puke and then take his laptop, I've done something wrong, right? At the very least, I have an obligation to kick him over onto his back so he doesn't choke in his own puke, right? It would be wrong to just let him die. Okay, so we don't always have an obligation to save people, but sometimes we do. Where we disagree is that I think abortion is almost always a form of killing. It's not just failing to save, and if it is, it's a bad kind of failing to save, just like not kicking over your roommate, right? Okay, so first of all, I want to defend the claim that abortion is a form of killing, right? So maybe that seems obvious. I think it does if you think about the intentions and the actions of the people involved, right? So we don't have an obligation to save random kids in Bangladesh, but compare that with getting an abortion. It's really different. So I don't save those kids in Bangladesh, but I don't want them to die. I don't intend that they die. I don't hope that they die. If they all lived, I'd be super happy, right? That would be great. Okay? But that's not the case when you procure an abortion, right? If you go to the abortion doctor and they hand you a baby afterwards, you're going to ask for your money back, right? You didn't get what you wanted. Second, when I fail to save starving Bangladeshi kids, I don't do anything. I'm just apathetic. I'm just lazy. I'm like, I could save those kids, but why? I don't know. There's so many. Let them die, right? But when you get an abortion, you have to do something, right? If you're just sort of apathetic and sit on your ass and do nothing, you're going to end up with a kid, right? Not an abortion. Okay. So if abortion is a kind of failing to save, it's a special kind of failing to save. Maybe it's more like evicting a tenant. And so this was sort of an analogy that came up in Dr. Kershnar's presentation. Eviction is a kind of action, right? And so it's a good analogy on that front. I don't think it helps with the intentions. And I do think the intentions are important. medical technology keeps getting better and better, if we thought, oh, we're just allowed to sort of kick the fetus out of the woman, but not intend to kill it, well, eventually, down the road, we'll be able to save any fetus at any stage of development. So you'd always end up with a baby if we weren't ever allowed to intentionally kill the fetus. All right, so the question is it ever okay to evict a tenant when doing so will result in their death? Right? Think about the party pooper case. There's the party. You decide you want to kick people out, but there's been a huge blizzard, right? It's 10 below zero. The roads are impassable. Everybody's cars are buried under 8 feet of snow. Nobody can go anywhere. They're all just going to freeze to death if you kick them out of your house. Clearly, it's wrong to evict your guests in that situation, right? Because it'll lead to their death. And again, if we're granting that the fetus has a right to life, it seems like that's exactly analogous with evicting the fetus from the womb. You're evicting it into a situation where you know it will certainly die. So I don't think eviction is permissible. Lethal eviction is permissible in sorts of party pooper cases. These are like the party pooper 2 and the jet cases. So another thing Dr. Kershnar spent a lot of time talking about is, well, look, the fetus was never even given consent, right? It doesn't have any sort of right to be in the womb. But again, even uninvited guests, you can't lethally evict. So remember my buddy Vinny, big drinker, also kind of a ladies' man, right? Every weekend, he'd go to the bars, he'd find some lady, he'd bring her home, and he'd, 25% of the time he'd wake up with her the next day in his bed. He doesn't know how he got there. Now, he had a kind of a strict rule. I mean, he was sort of a dick, for lack of a better word, and, he never wanted a woman spending the night in his house, right? He didn't want to deal with that the next day, right? He never gave consent to it, but, he was a big drinker. Sometimes he'd pass out right after doing the deed before she'd left. Sometimes he would pass out while doing the deed. It was super awkward. Anyhow, one time, he wakes up the next day, there's this chick in his bed with him, and, but there was a huge storm, right? I don't know, she had driven back with him, the roads are all, unpassable, and she had to stay there for like 2 days. This wasn't a girl that he wanted to talk with at all, and he basically had to hang out with her for 2 days. It was super, super awkward, right? And one of our friends, we're calling and texting back and forth, and one of the guys just says, just kick her out, come on. We all knew that was a joke. She wasn't invited, he didn't want her there, but you cannot kick somebody out into certain death, no matter what, right? It sucks, right? It wasn't fair. I mean, it's just the way the chips fell. Look, you just can't sort of lethally evict people. I mean, you don't even have to tell this crazy story. I mean, you can imagine there's a skydiver who, because of the storm, lands in your backyard, but there's a storm. All sorts of reasons someone could accidentally be on your property through no fault of their own, without your consent. You cannot lethally evict them, even if the person sucks and it's annoying to be with them. Okay. Now, Dr. Kershnar says that we can evict with proportionate force. And the use of lethal force is warranted, is proportionate in the case of bodily trespass, right? So his argument is up there, right? We can use lethal force to prevent rape, but carrying an unconsented to fetus is just as unjust or just as bad as unconsented to sex, as rape. And if that's right, then you can use lethal force to prevent an unconsented to pregnancy. But I don't think that that's the case, right? So, think about the second claim. Carrying an unconsented to fetus is just as bad as unconsented to sex. I've never carried any sort of fetus, but I do have some kids. My wife has done it. I've seen it fairly up close. It's not like a walk in the park. I'm not saying it's fun, but rape is pretty freaking bad. And I think the claim that you can imagine, a couple, their condom breaks, the woman ends up pregnant for 4 weeks and then miscarries or something. She carried an unconsented to fetus for 4 weeks. Is that as bad as being raped? I submit to you that it's not. I mean, being raped is much, much worse than that. The other thing to say in this connection is that, you know, the fetus is in the body without consent, let's say. What can you do in that situation to rid yourself of the problem? Now think of it this way. I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Inner Space. It came out a long time ago. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. I don't know. Any sort of movie with shrinking people, right? You got some sort of shrinking scenario. You end up with one person inside of another person, right? Maybe, you know, I'm, you know, an idiot. I'm walking around. I wander in some lab here on campus and I get shrunk and I end up in this guy's ear. And, you know, it's like annoying the crap out of him and I'm yelling, hey, what happened? And he can hear me because I'm in his ear. And he just says, well, shoot, this guy's in my ear. I'm just going to kill him. And he, you know, squishes me with his finger. That's not okay. I mean, you can be in someone. That doesn't mean you don't have a right to life, right? Maybe I'm inside someone's, you know, I don't know, this is some other version. I'm in a submarine or something in somebody's stomach. Still, you can't kill me, right? Just because you're in someone else's body, of course, you keep your right to life. That doesn't give them license to kill you, even if you're annoying their ear, right? So just to sum up, I've argued that abortion is wrong since A, fetuses are immature human beings, but human beings with a right to life, right? You guys are all members of the human species, right? You guys are all human organisms, right? The human organism that you are existed as a fetus a long time ago. It's always been wrong to blind you. Right? There was never a time when it would have been okay to blind you. There's never been a time when it would have been okay to suck out your brains. And I think there's never been a time when it would have been okay to kill you. Right? So if that's true, then you had the right to life when you were a very immature fetal human being. And, you know, sorry to say it, but there's nothing really that special about you. Everyone is just like you. All of us had rights when we were fetal human beings. All right. Then I've argued, given that fetuses have a right to life, well, abortion's wrong, right? And so all of these cases about sort of trespass and not having consent to be in the woman's body and all of that, fine, sure. You know, maybe we can quibble about some of the details. But I don't think it matters. I don't think consent matters. There can be all sorts of cases where, you know, again, you're on somebody's property without their consent. They cannot use lethal force to evict you. Likewise, you can be inside, you know, this guy's ear without consent, and he cannot just kill you to stop the annoying itching sensation. Not saying that that's equivalent with pregnancy, but the point is you can't just kill somebody because they're in your body. Thanks so much for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
David? Okay, this is David Kershnar, the chair of the University of Buffalo philosophy department, very famous philosopher.
I'm not actually the chair.
Was chair, a very famous philosopher. All right.
Now, I don't have a horseman's race. I'm impartial. I'm sitting on the fence. So I can be very objective. I just say, job destroyed. One thing, Steve. Take this very plausible view that fetus is a part of it. Just like my 5 o'clock shadow is part of it. So it can't trespass, right? It can't violate my bodily integrity. Even if it's very annoying, it can't be an aggressor. So none of those things, and I mean, it's very plausible the fetus would know the kingdom type article, at least after it's attached to the uterine wall. So it's very plausible that it's all right, so it can't be an aggressor, it can't be a trespasser, it can't violate bodily integrity, it can't invade you. Now, you can probably run everything you want to say in terms of autonomy, you have a right to control, just like I can give my 5 o'clock shadow. But then, you know, you could have said that, but you've wasted a lot of our time with your presentation.
Fair enough. Imagine you had a cancerous growth in you that was conscious. I claim that, look, you could cut out that cancerous growth. I mean, you could destroy it with lasers if that's necessary to prevent you from having serious bodily damage or even just major inconvenience. And yet, that cancerous growth would be part of you, in some sense have been part of you. So I'm not sure why it is that something being part of you prevents it from infringing on your rights or for setting back your autonomy.
How can a part of you violate your rights? That part of you may not have a right, and you can make an autonomy argument. You can get rid of it. I can shave. And my beard does 5 o'clock shell doesn't have a 7 o'clock shell. Right. But it can't. Can't be infringed.
Well, I mean, I guess if the cancerous growth were a person, I would think it would infringe your life, even if it's your bodily right, even if it's part of you. But if it's not a person, then I'm not sure it has rights.
It's any of my body parts.
Right.
I think. Look, I feel you can just make everything you want to say in terms of autonomy.
I think you could, and I think we would fill it out in terms of the degree of that it sets back your autonomy, and then I would just run the same argument, right? That a sort of unwanted pregnancy sets back your autonomy to a degree that's, on average, equal, if not greater, to that of rape. You can use lethal force against a rape, but I'm just not sure whether a part of you can't infringe on your rights if the part of you will also a person. I mean, perhaps that's right. I just, have to imagine, like, a small machine and a big machine. I don't.
Conjoined twins, if they're a threat to each other, do you really think they're violating the right of each other?
Well, conjoined twins, the problem is that you have common property, right? So where they're combined, like the Hensel twins, you have sort of basically 2 heads on one body. Now, they have some duplicate organs, but leaving that aside, you might think that neither person in the Hensel twins is infringing on the other person's right, but it's because they have shared property. But if the Hensel twins, if one twin was kind of merging into the other twin's body and life, then yeah, I would think that'd be an attack.
The fetus is a new part. They didn't always have it, as is my 5 o'clock child, but they have parts in common.
Right. So if it is a shared part, then I guess I would just say, look, either you can use the setback autonomy argument, or it's just not clear to me that if a part of you is a person, the cancerous growth really is a person, that's not infringing on your rights, even though it is part of you.
So, if I'm stuck in your ear, and you can either go to the doctor and wait for 2 hours, and then you got to see the doctor and he can remove me, or you can just smash me with a Q-tip. Do you think it's okay to smash me with a Q-tip?
I guess I think about the degree of bodily invasion, right? I mean, I think that I can use a shank against Big Amp. And some might say, well, look, Big Amp's going to be done in like 15 minutes. I just think, look, if the ear invasion is similar to the Big Amp case, then that warrants lethal force. And I suspect you agree with me. So do you agree with me in the Big Amp case that you may use, even if he's a hemophiliac, and you know it? If Sheldon knows.
You can kill Big Amp.
Okay. What about I'm curious, what about the Nazi case? Do you think in the Nazi case that the degree of injustice toward the woman at Auschwitz is as great in the case where she carries an unwanted fetus as in the case of having unwanted sex with the officer?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I need to hear more details. I mean, I definitely, we don't pay surrogate mothers that much. It's not like, I think you'd have to pay someone a lot of money to agree to be raped. And we don't pay surrogate mothers anywhere near that. So I guess I just don't think it's... But
in the Nazi case, you have this woman, right? So the Nazis give her 3 options. They say, look, option 1 is we can kill you. Sure. Option 2, you can have sex with a Nazi officer, which she doesn't want to do. You can imagine she's a married woman who just has no interest in that. And option 3 is she could carry the fetus of a Nazi couple who's having problems carrying fetuses to term. Would it be unreasonable for her to say, oh, well, I definitely don't want to be killed, so as between the 2 other options, I prefer the sex to the unwanted fetus? Would that be unreasonable?
So preferring sex to an unwanted fetus is different than preferring rape to an unwanted fetus, I would say.
But it is rape, because it's, in some sense, it's forced upon her. It's coercive in that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Would the very best sort of rape be better than carrying an unwanted fetus?
You could see the woman saying the following. Look, someone would say, I prefer the unwanted pregnancy, right, the coercive pregnancy. Other people would say, I prefer the coercive sex. But the fact that it's a real decision and that someone could reasonably struggle over the 2 indicates, I think, that an unwanted pregnancy has a degree of unjust bodily invasion that is roughly equal, if not greater than that of the sex.
So here's something that didn't come up. When I talked about the unwanted pregnancy, I said, you're pregnant for 3 weeks and then you miscarry.
Right.
So, I think that counts as having an unconsented to fetus in your body. Does that? So to me, I would say if somebody had to choose between being raped and carrying an unconsented to fetus for 3 weeks and then miscarrying, you might be sad about the miscarriage if you're a pro-life person, but for sure from your own standpoint, everyone should prefer carrying the consent.
I agree with you. But we can have cases that run the other way. I think the degree of injustice depends on the circumstances. So if you asked a woman, would you rather be penetrated, while you're in surgery, so you're unconscious and you wouldn't know about it. In fact, you wouldn't learn about it. Or would you rather carry an unwanted fetus for 9 months? They probably say, well, I prefer option A. So, the idea is that there can be instances of both where the magnitude of injustice is not super severe. But on average, I think that it's not unreasonable to think that the degree of injustice with an unwanted pregnancy is equal to that of rape.
So I don't know if you guys have seen Jane the Virgin. I don't know, it's kind of a funny show, you might. So there's this woman, she goes to the gynecologist, she's supposed to get a checkup, the gynecologist is a drunk and unreliable, and she impregnates her. That was it's a pretty awful thing. It threw her life into total arrears. She carried the pregnancy to term, had the baby. Again, it depends on exactly the kind of, if it's the very best kind of rape imaginable, that seems like a weird thing to say. Maybe that would be better. But intuitively, would you rather be raped by Big Ant? I guess I can say this. Would I rather carry a kid for 9 months or be raped by Big Ant? I would carry a kid, for sure.
I prefer Big Ant.
Well, I don't want to speak for anyone else. I am literally just speaking for myself.
All right. Dale?
Two questions for Steve.
Sure.
You guys have given a lot of analogies about strangers, unwanted party guests, skydivers, all kinds of silly stuff. What about the fact that this is the fetus's mother?
Right.
Isn't that ethically relevant? That's one question.
Sure.
And I'm not clear what your answer is to John's argument that obviously it's wrong, like if you intentionally harm a fetus.
Sure.
So then, if that's wrong, why would it be wrong to kill it? Like, what if your mother intentionally gave you drugs that would make you short and less athletic?
She did. Damn her.
If you have a valid complaint against your mother, would you think that she has wronged you?
All right. So the first argument was, what about the fact that woman's the fetus's mother? Look, I think that might be relevant. There might be a special obligation here, but it's not strong enough to allow the fetus to be inside her body. Again, I use the case of the anal intercourse case, where an adult male, the only way he can stay alive is to have anal intercourse with his mother. Again, a bizarre set of immunities that she has that will inoculate him from whatever serious disease he has. It's not the case, the fact that she's his mother gives him permission to be inside of her, even if that's necessary to save his life. Now, if it's the case that 10 minutes of anal intercourse is less of a bodily intrusion than 9 months of unwanted pregnancy, then that's sort of a good analogy here. Okay, and the second case, you said. So, Dale, what was the second argument?
It's obvious that your mother would have wronged you if she.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, good. Yeah, so if it's wrong to harm the fetus, doesn't it follow that it's wrong to kill the fetus? So a couple things here. One, you might think that what's wrong about things which set up blinding is what it does to the person that results, not to the fetus itself. Now, there's an issue as to whether the fetus is, in fact, the woman, an early fetus. We can get that discussion. But let's say it is wrong. Let's say that it's wrong for the same reason that's wrong to blind an adult. Still, it would be okay to blind a rapist or other bodily intruder. And so as a result, there's a justification for blinding or destroying the fetus. So even if the fetus has the full set of rights and is just as important as, let's say, Nick or Rob, still, it doesn't mean that those rights aren't forfeited when the fetus is involved in an invasion. Yeah.
The fetus case is wildly different than the rapist case, right? That's the child of the mother.
Right, but
I don't think that's relevant. I mean, it's outrageous to compare a fetus to a rapist.
I don't think it's outrageous because look, imagine that you, let me give you an example. Imagine that you had a psychotic rapist, right? So a rapist who doesn't know that he's acting wrongfully because he's fully psychotic, so that he's neither blameworthy nor is he legally guilty. My claim is it's still okay to kill a psychotic rapist, right? So it's not the guilt or innocence that makes someone forfeit a right. Rather, it's the degree to which they're an unjust threat. And the unjust threat is largely independent, perhaps not entirely, but largely independent of the degree to which they're blameworthy.
Sorry, there was you in the back?
Yes, so if we were to get rid of the rape scenario, do you have a stronger argument? Because myself, I've been a victim of that several times. But one of my classes, and I found this very interesting how they define life, was, because I'm reading a medical book, they were defining life by either brain alive or heart alive. And I connected it to my great-grandma, who we had no choice but to put her in a nursing home. And they, in the book, discussed how sometimes it's, when you're in a nursing home, how even if the family says no, they urge to take or stop life support, and even after a certain point, even if the family still says no, they turn life support off, which they did to my great-grandma as well. But I found it interesting. They were saying heart alive was your heart's still beating, but the way the book said it was if your brain's still functioning, in a sense, you're alive. So I guess my question, considering you wrote a book too, at which point do you think would be considered somebody to where they have life? Because a fetus can't speak up, nor can somebody with a mental illness who they have to rely on their family to speak up for them.
Okay, so if I understood your question correctly, is at what point in time does an individual gain a right, and when does she lose it? Is that a fair character? Okay, so I actually...
Life. A right or life? I thought.
Oh.
I guess the question was, when do we have?
I'll address both and then.
Well, I guess it's connecting both.
Okay.
Because when somebody's in a home and they're stuck and they can't speak up, they have. I feel they have just as much of a right to life, just as I feel a fetus does, even though they can't speak up. So I guess at which point is it appropriate to be like where it's right to, what if because there's other options here, there's adoption.
Sure. And so I'll address sort of when I think life begins and when people begin their rights. Okay. And, okay, so I think that you begin your life when you start to exist, and you end your life when you cease to exist. And I think rights roughly correspond to that period. So when do you start to exist? I don't actually think it's at conception, right? So Dr. Keller seemed to suggest that it began at conception. Dr. Kershnar is famous for sort of pushing that line. The problem with that is you might think you don't exist until you have a brain. And here's how you can see it. Imagine that you take my brain and you put it in Dr. Keller's head, and you take Dr. Keller's brain and put it in my head. I think I would wake up, I would open my eyes and be in his body and vice versa. If my location is tracking the placement of the brain, that would suggest that an essential feature of me is either having a brain or the location of the brain. Similarly, if you were to have one body, this is not actually the Hensel twins, but you can imagine a similar case, one body with two heads off it, you might think, well, how many people are there? Two. But yet there's one organism. So if you think that an individual is an organism, you're going to have a hard time saying how many individuals are there. Similarly, if you have one head but two bodies branching off it, you think, well, how many individuals are there? Well, one, even though arguably there are two organisms. So there's good reasons to think that we should locate an individual with the brain and not with the organism or the body. Okay, so if that's true, the question is, when do you develop a brain, or at least a brain with the capacity for consciousness? And I think that's roughly at 5.5 to 6 months. So if I had to say when an individual begins, I would probably say roughly at that period. And when they lose their capacity for consciousness, they cease to exist.
Is that because you're looking at brain functions, or brain tells the rest of the body how to function, or?
I guess I think just it seems that the individual is both the location and the number of individuals is tracking the location of the brain and the number of brains. If that's right, then there seems to be a pretty close connection between an individual existing and her brain, perhaps a functioning brain. And if that's right, then it seems that an individual doesn't exist before there was a brain, doesn't exist, if some other brain, melts away, dissolves, they cease to exist. John, you want to take that?
Well, there's a bunch of other questions. I mean, just very briefly, I guess I just think you and me are human organisms. We're animals. That's what I am. I mean, you say, oh, I'm a brain. I mean, a brain sounds like a slightly scientifically more respectable version of a soul. I just think, no, I'm a human organism.
So if there's one body with two heads leading off it, is there one individual there or two?
Well, there's some, we got to get some more details.
Okay.
But I agree that there are some tough cases for my view, for sure.
Okay.
So what I'm going to say about that is going to be...
I just want to say one other quick thing, then I'll take a couple questions, which is just that Dr. Keller and Dr. Tuggy do not actually believe that the motherhood is key to abortion. Because you can imagine if a woman were to be involuntarily pregnated, right? Someone were to sort of, teletransport, right? Or use, Star Trek technology to put a fetus inside of her. And we were to ask Dr. Keller or Dr. Tuggy, would that be okay to kill the fetus? Clearly that is not the fetus's mother. I'm guessing they're both going to say, no, it's wrong for the same reason. If that's correct, then the motherhood argument is not part of their reasoning to oppose abortion. Yeah.
Dr. Keller, you mentioned something about a best imaginable situation of rape. I don't think that exists at all. I think rape is rape no matter what. But my question was regarding a fetus's ability to live on its own, and how it isn't viable on its own until 20 weeks or about gestation. And I don't understand how you can say that that fetus, or not even a fetus yet, just a lump of cells, has the same right to live as a living, breathing human.
Yeah, so I guess the short answer is, good question. I guess I just don't think being able to live on your own is required to have a right to life. I mean, a newborn baby can't live on its own. A 5-year-old kid can't even really live on its own.
Biologically, though.
I guess I'm not totally sure what that... So, I mean, the other thing, I guess with just going more with your examples, look, a 20-week-old fetus might be viable in a technologically advanced society like ours. It wouldn't be viable in a society that didn't have the medical technology we have. And again, I just don't think your rights would depend on the level of technological advancement of the society. So, you were saying, you made 2 points. One, you said, oh, it's not even really a fetus, it's just a lump of cells. If it was just a lump of cells, then I would agree with you. I think that's the argument that you should make. But whether or not something's viable, that depends on so many other external things.
Not biologically viable, though, without living in the mother's body, there would be no possible way for that lump of cells to keep living on as an organism, whereas a baby would be able to function biologically.
But
without being in the mother's body.
Do you think in 100 years it's still going to be 20 weeks will be the cutoff for viability? I guess what I'm saying is...
That's gestation.
I guess what I'm saying is when a fetus can survive outside the mother, when you could, implant it in an artificial womb or whatever, just depends on technology, right? Even, maybe sort of a different sort of a case, but Dr. Kershner's been talking about sort of Siamese twins. They're not, there might be Siamese twins that weren't viable without the other. You couldn't separate them. Maybe there's one that would die if they were separated. I guess I just think the ability to survive on your own, biologically, or however we define it, just isn't what's related to having the right to life. I think the other point you made is, I disagree with it, but I think that's the relevant point. If it's just a lump of cells, if it's not a human organism, then I totally agree. It wouldn't have a right to life.
So I guess I'm just really confused about your argument. It doesn't really make that much sense to me. And it lies with where the background is. So I'm confused as to whether you're saying the fetus is a human being and human beings have that right to life,
Yes.
or the person, a fetus is a person, and by that definition, the person will have the right to life. You're saying it's a human being based on your definition, where it's just a biological basis. It's a human being.
Yeah, so when I use human being, I just mean biologically, like
Okay,
human
so what makes a
organism.
human being have a right to life? Is that just, you're saying that intuitively it does? Or that-
So I think humans have a right to life because they have a different sort of nature than other animals. It's a tricky question, like what makes a human being have a right to life? In some sense, you're asking what makes it wrong to kill people. And there's like a ton of different answers that people give about why it's wrong.
Well, that's why it's
to kill
interesting,
people.
because you have the person there.
Yeah.
Like, we define the person there, and what was it that you used? Well, I don't know. I guess you didn't really define what a person was. And
By person, I just mean something with a right to life. That's all.
I just think this is confused there. Whether you're just like, because it, like, I don't know why.
So I didn't try to get into this deep stuff. I guess I said a couple things just hoping they were sort of, you would like agree. Like, hey, I already think that all humans have a right to life. I think it's a human right. I think it would be wrong to blind a fetus. And so we don't have to get into these deeper questions. If we wanted to get into the deeper questions, here's one plausible story about what makes it wrong to kill you or me. What makes us have a right to life? Well, we've got these really valuable futures. That's why it's worse when a college student dies than when an old person dies. We're sort of being robbed of a valuable future. And if that's even part of the story of what makes it wrong to kill someone, then that very same sort of reasoning would apply to a fetus that also has a valuable future. It has more of a future than a college student.
So the potentiality of the fetus is what gives it.
Not the potentiality, just I guess you could say potential future if you wanted, but again, in the same sense that you and me only have potential futures. Just the futures that we would live with all of the good and bad that come with them.
Quick question for you, Steve. So I feel like your argument ultimately relies on duty, there being a lack of duty. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And would you say also that abortion is universally permissible? So in all situations, in any situation, because the mother can never owe a duty to the fetus, abortion is permissible.
Well, there could be cases where it's impermissible, where the woman doesn't consent to an abortion. So, it's forced upon her. So, but leaving.
Situations where she chooses the abortion.
Yes, that's permissible as part of controlling her body.
That's fair. So I want to bring up two potential problem situations. So the mother who gets an abortion just because. There's no real reason. That feels bad. Perhaps worse, a mother who repeatedly gets abortions because she likes the attention. So she's maliciously killing only because some people might be nice to her. I'm not saying these are actual cases, they're just troubling.
Sure.
And what I'm thinking is, I think there's situations where someone could voluntarily assume a duty. So in situations of rape, that seems pretty clear. You didn't necessarily assume a duty, but if you are going about with the intention to become pregnant, with the intent to foster and love a child, whatever, it seems as if you're taking on a certain set of duties whereby you owe a duty to the fetus. And in that situation, it seems like you're violating that duty by voluntarily killing that fetus. Do you have any feelings about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can withdraw consent, right? Unless there was something which prevented you from withdrawing consent, like a meta-consent. In the same way that a woman could repeatedly invite men to have intercourse with her and then, 3 minutes in, withdraw that consent, making them stop and be very frustrated. That might be malicious, mean, selfish. She might hold them up from ridicule, but still that would be permissible because you can withdraw consent. So that's why I think, again, with the kind of the box of chocolates case, you might be criticizable in all sorts of ways, but that doesn't make your actions unjust. Cody?
I had a question for Dr. Keller, kind of a variation on a famous thought experiment. Let's say you and I wake up tomorrow and I'm hooked up to your kidneys, right? Through no fault of either of ours. The doctors say that they can separate us after about 9 months, but doing so before then will kill me, right? Which, while I might really want you to stay hooked up to me and keep me alive, would you say that I have a right to your kidneys in that case?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that you have a right to my kidneys.
So then would it not be morally permissible to unhook yourself from me and let me die?
Yeah, so that, very famous case, good question. I mean, I think that to me is a pretty clear case of failing to save, right? So I could save you.
Yeah, and I'm already hooked up to you.
Yeah. I could save you, there's actually some interesting arguments about whether it really would be permissible to disconnect, but I do think, it is, my own view is that it is permissible in general to fail to save, and it's sort of plausible that in this case, I can fail to save, but I think that's just pretty different than an abortion case. And again, I mean, it seems like I certainly, when I disconnect from you, I don't have any intention that you die, I don't hope that you die. In the things that we call abortions, the intention is for the fetus to die. So that seems like a pretty important difference. If you said, well, okay, it's never wrong to perform an operation where you're trying to kill the fetus. We should always try to save the fetus, and if it dies, that'll be sad. I mean, that would be a huge change from where we are right now. And then we can talk about further sort of disanalogies, but I guess I think.
So you were saying that if we changed it so that we tried to save the fetus, but knowing that we would fail every time, then it would be more permissible than how we currently view abortions.
I think that's at least moving in the right direction. So you're just saying, here's an analogy. And I guess I'm saying, well, here's a disanalogy. And it's a little bit like with some of the other stuff, with the, being the parent. Maybe is relevant in this case. So, I wake up, I'm connected to you. The doctor says, oh, you got to stay connected for 9 months. By the way, we did this blood test, and actually, this is your kid from, some fling having I mean, that feels like it might change the calculation a little bit. Maybe I should make up for lost time and stay connected with you. That's right.
So I want to just jump in with the violinist case, just 1 second. And that is, note the similarity between a very frequent type of abortion, which is the use of an abortion pill. You might think that the abortion pill, if it disintegrates the uterine lining, and it's the part of the uterine lining that's the part of the woman, you might think that using the abortion pill is very much like a refusal to, refraining from benefiting the fetus rather than killing the fetus. So that if someone were to concede that it's okay to disconnect yourself from the violinist, and I think that's a fairly strong intuition, it would seem at the very least that you've said, okay, even if other abortions are okay, the 10% or more that are taking the abortion pills, those are now just and arguably permissible. So I'm not sure that the pro-life position, which opposes the use of the abortion pill, which is certainly the majority of the pro-life groups, are free to agree with Cody's point. So I'm wondering how you would respond to that.
Is this like the morning after pill?
Yeah, the morning after pill. And the case where it occurs after conception, not when it blocks conception, but after conception, and disintegrates the uterine lining.
Yeah, well, I still think there's the disanalogy of whether you're the parent. I do think there's, I guess, you were sort of mocking some of this stuff, but I do think well, no, the nicest possible way. I fully approve. But, I do think, being connected up with Cody, is like a highly unnatural and forced state of affairs, what that feels analogous to is a case where someone was raped and ends up pregnant. And, lots of cases aren't like that. So, in a normal case, yeah, this is like a natural outcome. I do think things, if somebody said, what right do dolphins have to be in the ocean? It's like a weird question. Like, that's where they belong. That's their natural habitat. A fetus's natural habitat is in its mother's womb. I think it's pretty different than these sorts of weird cases where I was abducted and connected to somebody else, and it's like a highly unnatural state of affairs. I'm not saying everything natural is good, of course not, but I do think, here's a claim, things have a right to be in their natural habitat. Pretty plausible. I grew up in California. They built a road. There were like some frogs that didn't get, then we built a frog bridge so that the frogs could go over the bridge because frogs have to be in their natural habitat. People think like that in California, at least. Maybe not here.
Yeah, first one back.
Okay, so this is a question for Dr. Keller. So, actually, no, I'm sorry. This is a question for Dr. Kershnar. So, basically, let's say you have a house. You own this house, and you like to leave the windows open. And let's just say, for example, there's plant seeds flying around that you come inside the house, and eventually a plant will grow within the house. So my question: you take all the steps to avoid all these. You take all the steps to avoid the plant from growing. However, the plant still grows in the house. Do you think it's still morally permissible for the plant to grow in the house?
No, and even if plants have rights, I think the answer is no. You didn't invite the plant in. Like, by now, I used to live in Philadelphia. Philadelphia, in the late 80s, was like flooded with the homeless. And if I open my window on a hot day, Philadelphia can be very hot over the summer, and some homeless guy comes in and sits on my couch, eats my Cool Ranch Doritos, puts his dirty feet all over my clothing and my couch, I think I'm free to tell him he has to leave, even though I sort of made it possible for him to enter by opening the window. If you think of opening the window like a woman, opening herself up to a man's sperm, and you think of hotness like being aroused, then, again, this is kind of Thompson's case. It's just not clear that you've invited in the plant seed. It's not clear that you've invited in the fetus. It's not clear you've invited in the homeless person, even if you know you took a risk that was going to occur. Taking a risk that something's going to happen does not justify it. Just one more analogy. I used to run at night. I used to live in Detroit, and I used to run in the middle of the night because I didn't get my running done during the day. And people would yell at me. They're like, "You're an idiot. No one runs in the middle of the night in Detroit. You were just inviting people to sort of attack you." And I think, look, even if there's at least a substantial likelihood and I knew I was taking the risk, I still have not authorized people to beat me down and take my Walkman. And I gather that that's the sort of argument you're giving with the people seeds.
Yeah, but I still think, the whole question is about evicting with lethal force. Let's say I drop my kids off at school, I leave the car doors unlocked, I come back, I get in the car, and I'm on the freeway, and I notice some, mentally very handicapped, boy has climbed into the back seat, and is there, and he's, kicking the seat with his dirty shoes. Can I pull over on the freeway and kick the kid out of my car, knowing that, given his mental state, is going to just wander into the freeway and get killed? I just think clearly I don't have, that would be wrong to do. The kid doesn't have a right to be in my car. I didn't invite the kid in. None of that's relevant. It would still be wrong to kick him out if that would lead, if I knew that would lead to that.
I'm open to agreeing with that. I just think that that's a less of a degree of a property infringement than invading your body.
Yeah. Well, I agree with that too. So.
Not so much. Other questions? Yeah, Nick.
Dr. Kershnar, does your view entail that an abortion at any stage would be permissible? So, like, are we talking abortions at 8.5 months here would still be just as permissible if the woman is?
Well, it's the degree of infringement. It's kind of like, take the case where a person withdraws consent to sex. If someone's like, 10 seconds away from finishing up, it's not clear you can kill them to make them stop. At some point in time, when there's enough time left over, if you've withdrawn consent, you can kill them to make them stop. I think roughly the same analogy is true for an abortion. So I'm not sure if it's close enough to birth, if that's similar to the case where the person, the male's just about ready to finish up. But in the vast bulk of cases, right, the 99.9%, since you're not that close, it is permissible. But I'm not sure in every case.
Is that line arbitrary?
No, I think there's actually a right answer. It's just we have to figure out what it is. It looks to be continuous, but there's not. There's actually a threshold. There has to be, right? I mean, it's same thing with the intercourse case. There has to be an actual threshold. Yeah. If there's at least one point where you can use lethal force, one point where you may not, somewhere along the line it's going to switch over.
Fair.
I want to actually just, sorry. We'll take a question.
I mean, I think you can always use lethal force to prevent rape. I mean, finding these thresholds seems tough. I would just say you can always use it, even if he's 2 seconds away from finishing.
All right.
And in that case, you can never use it in the pregnancy case.
Kind of
a problem.
Dr. Keller's kind of a violent dude, ex-football player. I do want to raise Mom's point, which is, look, the human right, why rights are attached to humanity is an important issue. I mean, there's nothing distinct about human beings as opposed to, Martians or Wookiees or, Coneheads. There's got to be something about human beings in virtue of which they have these rights. If it's something like sentience or rationality, then that seems to be what justifies having a human right, not being a biological species member. So, would you think that something like a fetus that doesn't have a cerebrum, it's born without, it's never going to develop a cerebrum, it's just, would you think that fetus has the same rights?
Yeah. I mean, look, it just depends what we mean by sentience or rationality. My passed out roommate was not sentient, right? I mean, you could have shocked him, you could have stabbed him, he wouldn't have woken up. He was not sentient, he couldn't think, he still had a right. So I think clearly we have to talk about some sort of capacity for sentience. Now, in the case of a healthy fetus, it has the same sort of capacity as a newborn baby or whatever, you just gotta wait and it'll develop. And I guess I just also think in general, what we care about is having that sentient nature or rational nature. Actual levels of intelligence come in degrees. I mean, it would be bizarre to think professors have more rights than
But imagine
people because they're smarter. I don't think being smart. It's not like your actual intellectual abilities that matter. It matters that you're the kind of thing that is rational, the kind of thing that's sentient.
But it's an odd view, right? A fetus that genetically will never have a cerebrum and thus never be sentient. In some sense, you're still saying, look, he doesn't have the capacity to be rational or even be conscious. He doesn't have the potential to be rational or conscious, but he's just, he has relatives who have that capacity or potentiality. I mean, it's an odd view. Your rights come into play in virtue of who you're related to.
No, I think it has to do with your nature. I mean, that fetus is still genetically human. I mean, it still belongs on the, if you look at the evolutionary tree, different creatures have different capacities, different powers. Yeah. Some creatures can fly. Now maybe there's a bird that was born with no wings for whatever congenital reason, so that bird will never be able to fly, but it still belongs on the flying branch of the tree. I mean, that's one of the powers of being a bird. That bird doesn't have that. And so likewise, I think rationality and sentience are powers that all human beings sort of have in some sense in virtue of being human. Maybe they can never exercise that because of this or that disability or whatever, but that's still the kind of thing they are. They're a thinking, rational thing, just like the bird with no wings is a flying thing that just can't fly.
Robin, and then Cody.
Quick question for you on this. So you're basically equating rationality to genetic makeup, it sounds like. So even if there's no chance of this fetus that doesn't have a cerebrum ever developing, this doesn't happen essentially, because it has a certain genetic makeup of humanness, we'll call it a quality, that gives it these kind of rights. What if we just genetically modify a coconut? You can splice it almost anything you want, and just put enough human genes like into this coconut, so it meets your threshold of humanness in terms of genetic makeup, does that coconut now have rights? Because that sounds ludicrous.
Well, I don't think it would be, I mean, I thought you just said add a bunch of human genes so that it had the relevance.
Yeah, because it seems like rationality to you is just a certain percentage of human genes.
No. So just to be clear, I think all aliens could be rational. I'm not saying being rational means having human DNA. I'm just saying human DNA is the fundamental basis for our rationality. That's why nothing can be.
If it is a like sufficient condition, you can give that same sufficient condition to a coconut in theory.
Well, it wouldn't be a coconut anymore, right? I mean,
if it had the same mental capacity as like a fetus that doesn't have a cerebrum, I don't know.
Well,
it just seems like we're just adding a certain. If it's a sufficient condition, it doesn't seem like a very good determining factor for rationality.
So I mean, I guess the question is what? Yeah, I guess I think. I mean, why? So being able to be rational. So if with somebody who is in a permanent coma, are they a rational being?
Maybe not. I mean, if there's no chance of recovery, you can prove that scientifically.
We can just stipulate. I mean, let's just stipulate. Let's say they'll never come out of the coma. I mean, I guess I just think the ability to exercise your power is not. It's just a different question from whether you have the power. So I mean, and on the other hand, I totally agree that there's one sense of rational where you're totally right. But I mean, imagine you're an expert piano player, and you end up in a war and you use your hands and because of the landmine. There's one sense in which you are still a badass piano player. Like, if only you had hands, you could play all sorts of cool stuff. Of course, you'll never be able to play because you don't have the hands. But I mean, it would be weird if we were ranking I don't know. I still think you've got this cool thing that lots of other people don't have. You just can't display it. You can't get it out of you.
It needs to be something greater than just mere human DNA. And I think without that, you're going to have a hard time ultimately furthering your thesis, just because there's so many kind of odd situations, like these theoretical ones, where there's no chance of coming back. I just don't see that. I mean, when we're talking about aliens, we don't care about human DNA. We care purely about their ability to interact or think or react in some primitive way.
Right.
So I guess it's difficult to draw the line. We're really just talking about threshold.
Yeah.
And if we're drawing a threshold, it's going to be arbitrary, and arbitrariness tends.
Yeah, but I mean, so I agree. I mean, I think you and I are on the same team here. So that is why I have my view. I don't want arbitrary. So if I made rationality, if we said the right to life depends on some sort of actual ability to be rational, then it feels like where are we gonna? How much actual ability to be rational? And so that's why I want to say no. It doesn't depend on any actual ability to be rational. It just depends on being a rational thing, having a rational nature.
Doesn't every living thing have the right to life? Why not coconuts?
Because they don't have a rational nature.
I just don't see the difference between the baby the person in the coma who has no chance of ever coming out and who's living in a purely vegetative state and a tree.
But don't you see a difference between a bird that was born with no wings and me? I mean, it's a bird is
different cells and you exist in different spaces.
Yes. Well, just so that's what I can say in your example. Of course, there's a million differences, but the bird is still the kind of thing that can fly, even though it never will. And likewise, I think a human that was born severely mentally disabled is still the kind of thing to act rationally.
Mentally disabled is completely different from functionally brain dead.
Sure, functionally brain dead.
Or is not having any possible functions. That's just the point I'm trying to draw. We can move on. I don't want to be that guy anymore. But
No.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mom and then Cody.
Once again, I think with listening to all this, I've come to the conclusion that your definition of a fetus doesn't uphold, and once that's clear, all that's left, it seems, is the mother. And unless there's some way that you can, is there a way that you can make it so that the fetus and its rights make sense to Like, is there a reason that it has rights? Otherwise, it just seems like it shouldn't be the mother. Like, and it's something that's just intruding on the mother. And so abortion is correct.
Well, what?
Like, I'm just asking, like once again, the fetus, what you're defining a fetus as, or what gives, it's really vague what property of the fetus is making it at this rate. And that's what's coming back and forth. And it doesn't seem like there's an answer. And so what's left after that is the mother. And it seems like Kershnar already thinking.
So I guess, my answer, whether you like it or not, is that having a rational nature gives something a right to life. Now, maybe you don't like that answer, but that's the answer. Now, so then there's the question, is the feature is the fetus a human organism? And I guess I'm not sure, I'm just sort of deferring in some sense to science about this. It's alive, it's genetically a distinct organism. It's not...
Life is kind of obscure in terms of science, and 60% of fetuses don't survive after 4 weeks. So,
but if they don't survive, they must have been alive. Only things that are living can fail to survive.
Viable. They don't make it past. They don't continue to progress into life. But it's where the definition of life is completely.
Yeah, defining life is tricky, but it's not.
And potentiality doesn't make life. That makes ejaculation.
Yeah. I guess I would say, we should go talk to some embryologists if we want to know whether a fetus is a living thing. It seems weird. We can talk about very early stages. It's grayer there. But at some point a fetus has got a heart and lungs and all of that. I don't understand. It's got a beating heart. It's got brain activity. It's a little hard to know what sort of definition of alive you would have to give to where the fetus wasn't alive.
Am I beyond to respond to that?
Sure. I'm bad. I don't know if there's other people waiting. So if there are, you guys can cut me off. But I'm happy to continue.
Well, a fetus post-conception doesn't, or most, when it comes to humans, don't survive past 4 weeks. They don't. They just don't progress.
Right.
And so that's where 60. So I don't know. That is natural. That naturally happens. 60%, 65. So that's hard to determine or to put in the early stages like that. Or to define life as part of the early stages. We're using conception, so hopefully that takes that out of the equation. And then when hearts and brains and whatever develop, it's still not clear that the potentiality for life may have rights. I don't know.
So yeah,
I think it's just your intuition, human intuition, being like that kind of is starting to look like me now. So I don't want to.
No. So I just want to be clear. It doesn't. I don't care. How it looks to me is totally irrelevant. So whether it has, I just think there's two separate questions. Whether it's a living human organism is roughly a scientific question. Whether the living human organism has rights is kind of a philosophical question. So,
do you think there's an answer to that currently? And in the current state of affairs, I think the answer to that is no, there's no answer to that. And so it should be left to the decision of the mother. So that's the only other relevant part. Making abortion permissible. I don't see why abortion is not permissible or why it's wrong, because there's no clear explanation, or at least that you're providing to me, that the fetus has a right to life.
Well, I think there's a pretty good scientific consensus that fetuses are living organisms. I agree that there's philosophical controversy about what gives things a right to life, and hence controversy in philosophy of whether fetuses have the right to life. But again, there is controversy in philosophy generally about what gives things a right to life. There's controversy about whether there is the right to life at all. Does that mean we should make murder legal? Well, no. That's just a separate question. I mean, I think there's a lot more to be said about that. But I just think you're totally right. There's controversy. But I don't think that means therefore allow killing in general. And again, maybe in this case that's right. But I think it would take a lot more argument.
Cody and then Dr. Hirschneff.
I actually have another question. I was just told that.
Okay, Dr. Hirschneff?
Well, make sure I'm on camera.
Oh, all right.
I'm back here. Here's a Kershnar-esque thought experiment for you about the rape case. People always will point out to me that the rapist is intentional, evil aggressor, fetus is innocent, can't be an aggressor, and then you'll do like a sleepwalking rapist. So imagine I put some Viagra in a drink, and I could reason or something. I didn't want my wife to know it was mine. Put it through your drink. And then you're sleeping over my house and you start to sleepwalk. If there's an erection that I'm partially responsible for, sexual sex, partially responsible. And then I'm related to you, my brother-in-law, so we're going to have family obligations. And you're going to sodomize me with this erection that I'm partially responsible for. Do you really think I can kill you?
Good, okay.
Can I just take the bugger in and go to therapy?
So if someone is somehow the cause of the danger, then it's not quite clear that the forfeiture occurs. So if I were to like shoot, imagine that I put the midget in a cannon against his will and I shoot him up in the air, and then he's coming down at me at incredible speed. And if I don't disintegrate him with my ray gun, he's going to kill me. In that case, there's something that might disallow my use of lethal self-defense, perhaps because I caused him to endanger me, or because I'm blameworthy, or some combination of those.
Consensual sex, the mother is partially responsible for the fetus's predicament. She foresaw, just as I foresaw if I put Viagra in the drink, there's a chance of sleepwalking bugger.
No, because in that case, I did something to the midget with the, sort of I created the condition explicitly using the midget. In the case of sex, the woman has at most taken the risk. She hasn't done something with the midget, merely she's taking the risk that the fetus might come in.
She took a risk that would put this creature in a predicament where it would need her assistance to stay alive. I took a risk by slipping the Viagra in a drink where I would then have to take on a very great burden to
Sure.
or I have to kill her.
Look,
Do you think I can kill you in that case?
So,
Sleepwalking and innocent.
no, I don't, probably because either you caused or you're blameworthy, one of the two, for creating the dangerous condition. But by analogy, if I'm running in Detroit and I've paid a bunch of gangs to attack muggers, not thinking that someday that would endanger me, in that case, it's not clear that I can use lethal force against them in virtue of the fact, it's not clear that I can't because they're still acting in a fully voluntary manner, but it's at least less obvious that the forfeiture occurs given my role under those conditions. Whereas if I just go running taking the risk, it's not clear that even knowing full well they might attack me, that I've somehow authorized their attack.
But the mother did cause the fetus's predicament unintentionally, when she foresaw this thing would lead her body to survive. It's innocent. I foresaw, to the philosopher, I may have to kill you to avoid this unpleasant physical burden. But you're innocent. It's not clear to me I can kill you.
Right. I guess the difference is the woman hasn't used the fetus as part of her project. Right. She hasn't activated the role of the fetus in the sense she hasn't used it. Whereas in the case of, you're slipping Niagara into my drink or me paying the gangs in Detroit, I've somehow used or activated the dangerous condition. And the difference between using or activating the condition as opposed to just taking conditions which open the risk of their being, dangerous.
What does activate mean?
Sort of either cause it or to be blameworthy or some combination thereof.
Yeah, but doesn't consensual sex cause pregnancy?
But I haven't caused the individual, I haven't set the individual in motion. Right, so for example, if I remove a grate above me, and so the midget's shooting down at me, right, In some sense, I've removed a protective condition, but that's different from creating the danger in motion.
So do you think, I mean, I guess I feel like this is a little bit of a vague area, but if somebody said, did your parents create you or cause you to exist? I would say yes. And I'm not sure if that is a problem for what you're saying, or if you're just saying something different than that, or what.
Right, so I think I would agree with that. I do think they cause you to exist, but they haven't caused you to exist in the sense that you haven't, used them or you haven't pushed them forward as part of your project.
I mean, I agree with the second thing, but I mean, if activation just means causing, then I guess the mother and father activate the fetus. That means they cause it to exist.
Well, would you think that someone running activated the attack of the attackers?
I don't know what activated means. I think when you have sex, sometimes you cause a new human being to come into the world.
Right. So, but the idea is that somehow, if you have to be either sort of blameworthy or a cause in the sense of sort of as part of your project to forfeit the relevant right yourself. Otherwise, you're just taking the risk. Right? There has to be some connection between the risk creation and you, other than the fact that merely you just open the door to the risk. And that explains the Detroit case, right? Why you haven't authorized being beaten if you run in the middle of the night in Detroit, but you might if you've paid the gang to attack runners. Yeah. There's some difference in those two cases, even though there's a causal role in both cases.
Yeah.
Mitch?
Yeah, just a question for you, Steve.
Sure.
I know, the classes I've taken with you, you talked about the distinction, this debate has kind of made this relevant, between the distinction between a person and a human being.
Right.
So, from what I've seen from your argument, it kind of seems like your definition of a fetus fails both.
Yeah, so I think that I think that early abortion, you're not killing an individual. Right? I don't think the individual comes to existence until they have either, some brain waves, let's say whatever that occurs, I don't know, 6 weeks, what is that, 3 weeks in, 6 weeks in, I forget, or cerebral brain waves, like 5.5 to 6 months. Before that, I don't think there's an individual there. And we saw this in the case of, we have one body with two heads, right? People like Professor Keller have to say, well, there's one individual there, even though intuitively it seems obvious there's two. Or if we switch brains, you say, well, you stayed in the same body. I just find this strongly counterintuitive. Or if you have one head with two different bodies, you have to say, well, there's two individuals there. It just seems to me crystal clear in my intuitions that there's one individual there. If you adopt those intuitions, then you have to think that an individual doesn't come into existence until there's a brain.
Just to be really clear, I'm not totally sure what I want to say about these cases, but I'm not saying that we are bodies. I'm saying that we're human organisms.
Right.
And in a case of, Siamese twins or something where there's one body with two heads, I guess it's not obvious to me that we should say that there's just one organism there. So, but, maybe I could be forced into saying that, but I guess, I'm not identifying persons with bodies. I'm identifying them with organisms, and I do think it's pretty plausible in those cases, at least superficially, to say there's two organisms.
How about in the brain switch case? Would you say that we didn't switch location? If your brain's in my head, my brain's in your head?
Yeah.
It's like waking up in the body of an old man. It's like, this sucks.
Look, I feel the pull. But when I get a heart transplant, I don't become someone new. Your brain is a vital organ, for sure. But I don't think I am a brain. I think I'm this thing right here. And maybe, I think it's very natural to think, oh, what am I? I'm like a soul that's controlling a body through the brain, I guess is what we've learned through science. And so if you switch the brain, the soul is in this other body. Yeah, if we're souls, then that's right. But I don't think we're souls. I think we're human organisms, and I think it's just clear as a matter of biology that this, we could switch brains, between a young organism and an old organism. I don't think you could keep, I don't know. I just think it's the same organism, and it's kind of a weird result, but it's organism.
Right. Note, if you think you're an organism, it's a little hard to explain how you have an afterlife, right? So if you were to be Jewish or Christian, you'd have some difficulty in explaining what it is that persists after the body dies and rots away. So a kind of price of this sort of animalism, the idea that you're an organism, is that you seem to have to concede that there's no afterlife. That's my claim anyway.
Well, if that organism exists after you die, then...
Sure, I mean, but do you think the life switches from like this carbon body to some other entity?
No, that's silly.
So
This body, afterlife. If there's an afterlife, I mean, I don't know.
So you think
Afterlife, but if there is, you have your body.
okay, I mean,
I'm just saying that follows from my view.
fair enough. I just don't think that you think that people have that they're one and the same body in heaven.
I'm just saying if you have a soul, look, whatever, fine. Think you're a soul. If you think you're a soul, then I think you should start thinking, dang, the world's pretty weird and mysterious. This sounds like what I learned in like a religion class growing up. And then once you're down that road, you're probably going to start thinking abortion's wrong. So I'm just saying, look, I think that we're human organisms. I think science tells us when a new human organism comes into existence. Yes, we have to use philosophy to determine when that organism gets it right. If you reject that, sort of fine, but if you start thinking you're some weird mental thing, then I just think then we would go down a whole different road in terms of the debate. But.
Yeah. Other questions? All right. Well, thank you. Appreciate it. Right. John, real pleasure. Definitely enjoyed it. Excellent job. Okay. Guys, thanks for showing up. We really appreciate it. So, great questions.